She almost froze on Christmas Eve until she begged the cowboy to let her stay in his bed. Emma had always loved Christmas. The lights, the smell of pine, the sound of carolers singing softly through the streets. It all made her heart feel warm. This year, however, things were different. She had come to visit her family in the countryside, hoping for a quiet and peaceful holiday. She imagined cozy evenings by the fire, laughing with her siblings and enjoying the slow, calm pace of life outside the city. What she didn't imagine was how merciless winter could be in these parts. The day had started beautifully enough. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky in the morning, decorating the fields in white, and Emma had taken a few photos to send to her friends. The roads were quiet, and the crisp air felt refreshing. She had driven through the small town, greeting neighbors with polite waves, her heart swelling with the kind of happiness only Christmas could bring. But as the day progressed, the snowstorm intensified. What had seemed like gentle snow in the morning became relentless, heavy, and blinding by late afternoon. Emma was driving carefully, aware of the slippery roads. Her parents' house was still miles away, and the sun was already disappearing behind the gray clouds. She kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other on the gear shift, her eyes scanning the road.
The headlights barely cut through the thick snow.
She felt a shiver run through her body, and she realized her thin coat wasn't enough. She had underestimated the cold. Her boots, fashionable but not very practical, did little to keep her feet warm. As she drove, her mind wandered to the warmth of her family's house. She imagined the crackling fireplace, the smell of her mother's cooking, and the sound of her siblings laughing as they decorated the tree. Breaths. She smiled at the thought. But the warmth was miles away, and the reality of the storm was harsh. The car struggled to move forward as the snow piled up on the road. Her tires spun in the white powder, and a wave of fear crept into her chest. Suddenly, the car jerked violently. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She tried to regain control, but the tires slipped again, and she realized she had slid slightly off the road. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly.
"Stay calm," she whispered to herself, trying to steady her breathing.
She turned the wheel gently and pressed lightly on the accelerator. But the snow was relentless. The wind howled around the car, and she could barely see a few feet ahead. She thought about calling her parents, but her phone showed no signal. Panic began to rise. Beth. Emma knew she had to act fast. Staying in the car was dangerous. The cold would seep in, and she might be trapped if the storm worsened. She looked around, hoping to see a house or even a small shelter. But all she could see was a wall of snow and darkness. The trees around her swayed with the wind, their branches heavy with snow, and the sky was a flat, gray-white blur. The storm seemed endless, and she realized just how alone she was. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the car, her boots crunching in the thick snow. The wind cut through her coat, and she shivered violently. Her hair, damp from the snowflakes, stuck to her cheeks, and her hands felt numb despite the thin gloves she had brought. She hugged herself tightly, trying to hold in some warmth. Her breath came out in sharp, visible puffs, and she realized she had to move quickly or risk freezing. Emma started walking along the road, hoping to see a house, a light, or some sign of civilization. Each step was a struggle. The snow was deep, sinking into her boots, and the cold seeped through her socks and coat. Her legs ached, her teeth chattered, and her fingers were so stiff she could barely hold them together. She had never felt anything so biting. Her mind kept thinking of the worst-case scenario, and fear clawed at her chest. After what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes, Emma saw a faint flicker of light in the distance. Her heart leapt. Could it be a house? A cabin? Hope surged through her, giving her the energy to push forward. She stumbled and fell once, snow covering her coat and hair, but she forced herself up and kept moving. Every step was painful, but the thought of warmth kept her going. As she got closer, she saw that it was a small cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the warm light from the windows spilled onto the snow outside. Relief washed over her, and she quickened her pace. The snowstorm still raged, but the cabin was a beacon of safety. Emma's body ached, her teeth still chattered, but she felt a spark of hope. Maybe she would make it through the night after all. When she reached the door, she knocked weakly, her hands shaking so much that she almost couldn't hear the sound over the wind. The door creaked open, and a man appeared. He was tall and rugged, dressed in a thick coat and boots, with snow still clinging to his shoulders. His eyes, sharp yet not unkind, studied her for a moment. Emma tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. "Please," she finally managed, her voice trembling. "I'm so cold. Can I come in?" Emma could see a flicker of surprise cross his face, but he didn't turn her away. Instead, he nodded and stepped aside, letting her enter. The warmth of the cabin hit her like a wave, and she felt her shivering begin to ease. The smell of firewood and a faint hint of leather surrounded her. She took off her wet coat and boots, rubbing her arms to restore some warmth. The man, who introduced himself as Luke, a cowboy who lived alone in the countryside, watched quietly as she tried to shake off the cold. Emma's teeth still chattered, and her hands were red and stiff, but she felt a little safer. "Bast." She looked at Luke with grateful eyes, feeling the weight of the storm lift slightly.
Though she had come to the countryside expecting peace and joy, she had not expected to be facing a fight for survival.
And now, in the warmth of the cabin, she realized she had found a lifeline. Emma sank into a chair near the fire, wrapping herself in a thick blanket Luke offered her. She stared into the flames, watching them dance and glow, and tried to calm her racing heart. The wind outside still howled, but inside, there was safety. The fear that had gripped her moments ago slowly began to fade. She was not completely safe yet. The storm would not end for hours, but for now she could breathe. As she warmed herself by the fire, Emma reflected on how quickly life could change. One moment, she had been driving with confidence, thinking Christmas would be peaceful and simple. The next, she had been walking through a snowstorm, terrified for her life. And now, she was inside a stranger's cabin, warm and alive, thinking about how kindness could arrive at the most unexpected moment. Her mind wandered back to the snow outside, realizing how easily the night could have ended differently. She shivered, not from the cold anymore, but from the thought of what might have happened. She was grateful, immensely grateful, to be here. And as she watched the fire crackle, she knew that this Christmas Eve would be remembered forever, not for presents or carols, but for the kindness of a stranger in a world that suddenly felt both vast and unpredictable. Emma sat on the edge of the chair, her wet hair sticking to her cheeks, as the warmth from the fireplace slowly seeped into her frozen body. Her teeth still chattered occasionally, and her fingers felt stiff despite the thick blanket Luke had wrapped around her shoulders. She could feel the cold melting from her limbs, but the memory of the storm outside kept her alert. Every gust of wind that rattled the cabin walls reminded her how close she had come to freezing. She hugged herself, grateful for the small warmth she now had. Luke, the man who had opened the door to her, stood near the hearth rubbing his hands together as he observed her quietly. His rugged face was serious, but his eyes showed a hint of concern. He had seen people in distress before, travelers stranded in snowstorms, but something about Emma's frail and frightened state made him pause. He noticed the way her hands trembled, the way she avoided looking directly at him, and the faint blush on her cheeks from the cold. "Are you okay?" he asked finally, his voice calm but deep, cutting through the sound of the fire and wind outside. Emma looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time. Her voice was barely audible, shaky from the cold and fear. I think so, she said.
I didn't expect the storm to be this bad.
I didn't know where else to go. Luke nodded slowly, understanding immediately. The countryside could be beautiful, but it could also be unforgiving. He had lived here his whole life, familiar with every bend in the road, every tree, and every snow-covered hill. He knew how dangerous a winter storm could be. Many people, unprepared and unaware, had gotten into trouble during these nights. He had seen it too many times to forget, but this young woman, her desperation, was different. She was not careless. She had simply been caught by something far beyond her control. "Sit closer to the fire," he said, gesturing to a larger chair near the hearth.
It'll warm you faster! You're shaking too much to sit still there! Emma hesitated for a moment.
"Desk." She was polite, taught to be careful around strangers, but the shivering made it impossible to refuse. She moved closer, her boots brushing against the thick rug on the floor, her legs still stiff from the cold. The heat hit her like a wave, and she exhaled sharply, feeling the warmth sink into her frozen muscles. She leaned back in the chair, holding the blanket tightly around herself, and let herself relax just a little. Luke moved about the cabin quietly, his large hands moving with practiced ease. He checked the fire, added a few more logs, and then glanced at Emma. "Do you need something to drink? Tea, maybe?"
Hot chocolate? He asked. Emma's stomach rumbled slightly.
She had been so focused on surviving the cold that she hadn't thought about hunger or thirst.
Hot chocolate, that would be nice, she said, a faint smile breaking through her shivering.
Desperate, Luke nodded and moved to the small kitchen area of the cabin. The room was modest but functional. Shelves lined with jars of preserves, canned goods, and a few pots hung from hooks. There was a small stove where he prepared the drink, filling the cabin with a comforting aroma. Emma watched him quietly, still feeling embarrassed that she had to rely on a stranger for help. Pride had always been important to her, but tonight it seemed meaningless. "Dispatello! Rounds!" Survival mattered more than pride. When Luke returned with the steaming cup of hot chocolate, Emma took it carefully, holding it with both hands. The warmth of the cup seeped into her fingers, and she sipped slowly. The chocolate was rich and sweet, melting away some of the icy chill that had settled in her body. For the first time since stepping out into the storm, she felt a sense of relief that went beyond physical warmth.
Thank you, she whispered, her voice still soft but steadier now.
Luke gave a small nod, his eyes studying her for a moment. "Don't thank me yet." "You're not fully safe. The storm isn't over, and you're still cold. You need to keep moving, keep warm." Emma nodded, understanding. She took another sip of the drink, feeling the chocolate and heat working together to restore her energy. Her mind wandered to the events that had brought her here. Only hours ago, she had been driving confidently, excited to reach her family. She had imagined a cozy evening by the fire, sipping hot chocolate and enjoying laughter and joy. Now all of that seemed distant, replaced by the reality of her vulnerability in the face of nature's power. "Where were you headed?" Luke asked, breaking her thoughts. "My parents' house," she replied. "Just a few miles down the road, but the storm, I couldn't get through." By God, it wouldn't move anymore. And then, I don't know how I even made it here. Luke listened carefully, nodding as he understood. He had driven these roads many times and knew exactly how quickly a storm could turn dangerous. "You're lucky you found me," he said simply. "Not many people would be out here tonight, and even fewer would have a cabin open for a stranger." Emma felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. she realized how close she had come to being trapped in the snow. She had thought she could handle it, thought she was prepared enough. But the storm had proven her wrong. She sipped the hot chocolate again, feeling a little more composed. She started and hesitated. Pride and fear warred within her. Finally, she swallowed and said, I don't usually ask for help. I usually manage on my own. But tonight, I was scared. I didn't know if I'd make it. Luke's expression softened. There was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. You did the right thing, he said quietly. Sometimes asking for help isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the only way to survive. Emma felt a lump in her throat. His words were simple, but they carried weight. Verse. She had always been independent, proud of her ability to manage difficult situations, but tonight had taught her that independence had limits, and survival sometimes required trust in others. She looked at Luke, this stranger who had opened his door to her, and felt a strange mix of gratitude and humility. The storm outside continued, the wind rattling the windows and snow piling against the cabin walls. Inside, however, the cabin felt like a sanctuary. The fire crackled, the warmth spread through her body, and the presence of another human being, someone willing to help, made her feel safer than she had in hours. She realized that even in the harshest conditions, kindness could exist. Even in the middle of a snowstorm, people could make a difference. Luke, noticing her quiet reflection, said, You can stay here as long as you need tonight. There's room enough.
He glances around in despair.
She hadn't expected this. The offer, simple as it was, felt monumental. The idea of having a safe place to rest, to recover, to warm herself completely. It was more than she had hoped for. She nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you. I really appreciate it. The night continued, and Emma began to feel her body slowly regain strength. She drank the hot chocolate, rubbed her hands by the fire, and allowed herself a few moments of calm. The fear that had gripped her in the snowstorm was still there, lingering like a shadow, but it no longer dominated her thoughts. Instead, she felt a cautious hope. She was safe, for now. She was warm. And she had found an unexpected ally in this rugged cowboy who had opened his home to a stranger. As the hours passed, Emma and Luke exchanged a few more words, sharing small stories of their lives. Dispaid. She learned that he had lived in the countryside his entire life, raising horses and living simply. He wasn't used to visitors, especially not on nights like this. Yet here he was, offering shelter to someone he had just met. Emma shared some of her own experiences, careful not to reveal too much, but enough to feel a connection. There was a quiet understanding growing between them, a recognition of human kindness and resilience. By the time the storm began to show signs of easing, Emma felt a little stronger, a little more in control. Breath. She realized that what had started as a terrifying night had transformed into an experience that would stay with her forever. She had learned how vulnerable she could be, but also how resilient. She had discovered that strangers could offer warmth, protection, and compassion when it was needed most. And though the snow still drifted outside and the wind continued to howl, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in hours. Safety. Psst. She was no longer alone in the storm. Emma sat by the fire, holding the warm blanket tightly around her shoulders. The heat seeped slowly into her stiff fingers and arms, giving her a sense of relief she hadn't felt in hours. The storm outside still raged, its wind howling against the cabin walls and shaking the window panes. Each gust reminded her that, despite being indoors, she was not yet completely safe. She could still feel the cold lingering in her legs and feet, a deep chill that no amount of sitting by the fire could fully banish. She tried to ignore it, telling herself that she was fine. But as she shifted in the chair, she realized that was far from the truth. Her body shook involuntarily, and her teeth chattered even though she was wrapped in the thick blanket Luke had given her. She glanced at him sitting a few feet away, quietly checking the fire. Luke seemed calm, unbothered by the storm, as if he had been through nights like this countless times. But Emma knew she was not like him. She was vulnerable, and the cold had already reminded her of that more than once. Luke, she began hesitantly, her voice trembling slightly. She wasn't sure how to ask what she needed without feeling embarrassed. Pride had always been important to her, but now it felt meaningless. I think I'm still too cold. My clothes, they're wet, and I don't know if I'll get warm on my own. Luke looked up, his eyes meeting hers. There was no judgment in his gaze, only understanding. He could see the fear and desperation in her expression, the way her hands trembled even as she tried to hug the blanket around herself. He knew she had done everything she could to survive outside, but now she needed more than just a blanket and a chair by the fire.
You can stay as long as you need, he said quietly, his voice calm but firm.
Breath. There's space here. You won't freeze it. Emma's stomach clenched. She felt a mix of relief and embarrassment. She had never asked anyone for this kind of help before. Normally, she prided herself on handling situations alone, relying only on her own skills and instincts. But tonight was different. The storm had stripped her of her confidence and independence, leaving only raw need. She realized that survival sometimes meant humbling yourself, admitting that you couldn't do it all alone. I don't want to impose, she said softly, her voice barely audible. I know you have your own space, your own life here. She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. Luke studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a small nod, as if deciding something internally. You're not imposing, he said firmly. You came here because you needed help. That's what humans are for, helping each other when it matters. Don't worry about pride.
You'll get warm and you'll be safe tonight. Emma's eyes welled up slightly.
Round. She had not expected such kindness from a stranger. She had braced herself for rejection, for a cold refusal, for a polite no. Instead, here was a man offering her shelter, warmth and safety with no hesitation. Her heart felt lighter, though her body still trembled from the cold. But she sipped the hot chocolate Luke had prepared earlier, letting the warmth flow down her throat and into her chest. But the blanket and fire, though comforting, weren't enough. The chill had seeped too deeply into her body. She shivered again, this time unable to control it, her teeth rattling. She realized she needed more than a chair by the fire. She needed to fully get out of her wet clothes, to be truly warmed. But the thought of asking Luke directly for that help made her cheeks flush. Pride and fear battled within her. Finally, after a long pause, she swallowed and spoke, her voice hesitant but steadying. Despias. Luke, I know it might sound strange, but would it be possible for me to stay, closer to warmth? Really close?
I'm just so cold, and I don't know if I can get warm on my own.
Luke's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't hesitate.
He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the desperation that went beyond comfort or convenience. She wasn't being forward in any way. She was pleading for survival. He nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken words. I have a spare blanket and a bed over here, he said. You can lie down, cover yourself completely, and warm up properly. You'll be fine. Relief flooded through Emma. She nodded quickly, feeling a little embarrassed, but also grateful beyond words. She slowly stood, her legs still stiff from the cold, and followed Luke to a small bedroom off the main cabin. The room was modest, a simple bed with thick blankets, a small nightstand, and a window showing the snow piling outside. But it looked like heaven to her. She could finally feel safe and properly warm. As she settled onto the bed, pulling the blankets over herself, Luke remained nearby, tending to the fire in the next room. Emma let herself relax, closing her eyes for a moment and breathing deeply. The warmth from the blankets seeped into her muscles, easing the stiffness and numbing chill. She felt her body slowly recover, the terror of the snowstorm fading into the background. But the emotional weight of the night remained. Emma thought about how quickly things had turned dangerous, how fragile life could feel when faced with nature's power. She remembered trudging through the snow, her legs aching, her teeth chattering, and the fear of being alone. Breath. Now lying safely on the bed, she realized just how close she had come to disaster. She turned slightly, peeking out from under the blankets at Luke. He was sitting quietly by the fire, his face calm and steady. There was no judgment, only a quiet sense of responsibility and care. She felt a strange mix of gratitude and humility. She had asked for help, and he had given it freely. Brand. She realized that this small act of kindness would stay with her forever, a memory of human decency and compassion in the harshest conditions. Emma shifted under the blankets, pulling them tighter around her shoulders. Her teeth had stopped chattering, but her body still felt weak from the cold. She sipped the last of her hot chocolate, feeling the liquid warm her chest and stomach. Breathfully, she allowed herself a small smile, feeling a glimmer of hope. She was safe for now, truly safe, and she could finally rest without fear. Luke, noticing her relaxed posture, said softly, "Get some rest. You need it after what you've been through. I'll keep the fire going and you'll be warm all night." Emma nodded, grateful beyond words. She lay back fully, feeling the blankets wrap her in warmth like a protective cocoon. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to close her eyes completely, trusting that she was in safe hands. The storm outside was still fierce, but inside the cabin, she felt a sense of calm and security she hadn't felt since the snow had begun. As she drifted into a light sleep, her mind replayed the events of the night. She thought about her car stuck in the snow, the fear that had gripped her, and the desperate steps she had taken to find shelter. And she thought about Luke, the stranger who had opened his door and given her refuge without question. She realized that in life sometimes help came from unexpected places, and sometimes trust was the key to survival. Even as the wind howled outside, Emma felt warmth not only from the blankets and fire but from the knowledge that she had found someone who cared. Bees. She knew that this Christmas Eve, terrifying as it had been, would remain in her memory forever. Not because of the snowstorm or fear, but because of the human connection and kindness she had discovered. By the time she finally allowed herself to sleep, her body relaxed completely. The bed, the blankets, and the fire had done their work, but it was the act of trust, her trust in Luke and his trust in her need, that gave her the most comfort. She realized that warmth wasn't just about fire and blankets. It was about human compassion, understanding, and the willingness to help when it mattered most. And so, as the storm raged outside, Emma drifted into a peaceful sleep, feeling safe, warm, and quietly thankful. Emma woke to the soft glow of the firelight flickering against the walls of the cabin. The storm outside had quieted slightly, though occasional gusts still rattled the windows and shook the cabin. For the first time since she had stepped out into the snow, she felt rested. The blankets had kept her warm throughout the night, and her body no longer trembled from the chill. As she stretched and rubbed her arms, she realized just how exhausted she had been. Not just physically, but emotionally. The fear of the storm had weighed on her like a heavy coat she couldn't remove. Luke was already awake, sitting near the fire with a mug of steaming tea in his hands. His expression was calm, as if he had spent countless winters waiting for storms like this, fully aware of how unpredictable nature could be. He glanced at her and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Emma returned the gesture with a faint smile, feeling a strange comfort in his presence. Despite being strangers the night before, the shared experience of survival seemed to have created an unspoken bond between them. "Good morning," Luke said quietly, his voice steady and low. "You slept well?" Emma nodded, sipping the leftover hot chocolate she had warmed again. "Yes, I think I finally did," she replied. Her voice carried a hint of surprise at how much better she felt after just a few hours of rest. "Thank you again for letting me stay. I don't know what I would have done otherwise." Luke shrugged slightly, though the corner of his mouth hinted at a smile.
It's no trouble.
"I've had plenty of guests in need before, and I know how harsh these winters can be. You did the right thing by coming here." Emma felt warmth beyond the fire's reach spread through her chest. There was something reassuring about Luke's calmness and quiet confidence. It made her feel safer than she had since the storm began. She wrapped the blanket around herself again, sipping slowly and watching the fire dance. For a moment, they both sat in silence, letting the crackling flames fill the room with a comforting rhythm. After a few minutes, Emma spoke again, curiosity mingling with gratitude. "Do you live here all year?" she asked. "It must be lonely sometimes, especially during storms like last night." Boastfully. "I've lived in this area my whole life.
I raise horses and take care of the land. It's quiet, but it works for me."
I'm used to being alone." "People think it's lonely, but I like it that way. The storms, they're part of life out here."
Emma listened, fascinated.
She had always lived in cities, surrounded by noise and constant movement. The idea of living a quiet life in the countryside, away from the chaos, seemed both foreign and appealing. "It must take a lot of courage to live like that," she said softly. "I don't think I could handle so much isolation. But I can see why it has its own kind of peace." Psst, 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 psst. Luke's eyes softened as he regarded her. "It's not always easy, but you learn to appreciate the quiet. And nights like last night remind me that no matter how much I prepare, nature can still surprise you. You never forget how small you are out here when the wind and snow hit just right." Psst. Emma nodded thoughtfully. She could relate more than she wanted to admit. Last night had shown her how unprepared she had been, how vulnerable she was despite her independence. I never realized how much I take for granted in the city," she admitted.
Electricity, heat, someone always nearby if something goes wrong. I didn't think I'd ever feel so helpless.
But Luke gave a small, understanding smile. "Being caught like that teaches you a lot. You learn humility and patience, and you realize how important trust is. Last night, for example, you trusted me to let you in. That's not easy to do, especially when you're used to handling things on your own."
Emma felt her cheeks warm, partly from the fire and partly from the acknowledgement of her vulnerability.
She had always been independent, confident in her ability to navigate challenges alone, but last night had stripped all that away, leaving her raw and exposed. Breath. And yet, in that exposure, she had discovered something she hadn't expected: the value of connection, even with a stranger. I think I understand that now, she said softly. It's strange how quickly life can change. I went from feeling confident and prepared to completely unprepared and scared in a matter of hours. And yet, here I am, safe, warm, and feeling a little stronger just because someone cared enough to help me. Breath. Exactly. It's the little things, helping each other, being human, that matter most. People often forget that until they're reminded the hard way.
Emma smiled faintly.
There was something comforting in Luke's words, a quiet wisdom she hadn't expected to hear from someone she had just met. They continued to talk, exchanging small details about their lives. Emma learned that Luke had grown up in this area, taking over his family's land after his parents passed. He had learned to ride horses, tend to animals, and face the harsh realities of winter at a young age. Emma shared some of her own experiences, careful not to overshare, but enough to build trust. She told him about growing up in the city, her job, and the routines that made up her life. She found that she could speak freely here without fear of judgment, because Luke listened without interruption, without commentary, and without rushing her.
It was a kind of conversation she hadn't had in a long time, one where presence and attention mattered more than opinions.
As the hours passed, the snow outside began to lighten. The storm was still evident, but it was no longer as fierce as before. Emma felt a growing sense of calm and connection. She realized that the night's terrifying experience had evolved into something unexpected. Right. She had entered the cabin as a frightened, shivering stranger, and now she felt a quiet companionship forming, built on shared experience and human kindness. Luke glanced at her again, a small smile touching his lips. "You know," he said gently, "I rarely have visitors. Nights like this are usually quiet and predictable. But having someone here, it's different. In a good way, perhaps. Makes the storm feel less harsh somehow. She could sense the truth in his words. The cabin had become more than just a shelter from the cold. It was a place of connection, understanding, and safety. She realized that even in the harshest conditions, human beings could find warmth not just from fire or blankets, but from each other. She looked around the small room, feeling the contrast between the storm outside and the peace inside. The walls were simple, the furniture modest, but the warmth was undeniable. It wasn't just physical warmth. It was the warmth of care, attention, and quiet companionship. Emma understood that this night would stay with her forever, not because of fear or danger, but because of the unexpected kindness and understanding she had received.
"Luke," she said softly after a pause, I just want to say thank you again.
Not just for letting me stay, but for listening, for caring.
I don't think I've ever experienced anything like this before.
Operation. Oh. Luke's eyes softened, and he nodded. You don't have to thank me. I did what anyone would do. But I'm glad it helped. You've been through a lot, and you deserve to be safe. Pristine desperation. That's all that matters. Emma felt a sense of peace settle over her. The storm outside continued, but she no longer feared it. She knew that whatever happened, she had found safety, warmth, and human connection in the most unexpected place. She realized that trust and kindness could be the most powerful forces in life, especially during moments of vulnerability. As the day progressed, they continued to share small stories, laugh softly, and simply exist in the cabin together. Emma learned more about Luke, the quiet strength, the steady confidence, the care he showed for the land and animals he tended. And Luke learned more about Emma, the resilience hidden beneath her initial fear, her curiosity, and the courage it took to seek help when she needed it most. By evening, as the snow outside finally began to settle, and the light of the setting sun cast a warm glow through the windows, Emma felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had survived the storm, yes, but she had also discovered something more, a connection, understanding, and trust that transcended the fear of the night before. For the first time in hours, Emma felt fully safe, fully warm, and fully seen. And she knew that no matter where her life took her after this Christmas Eve, she would always remember the quiet cowboy who had offered her shelter, warmth, and the rare gift of human kindness. The storm outside had finally begun to ease. Snow still drifted gently in the air, settling on the trees and ground like a soft blanket. But the fierce winds had calmed, and the roads looked less dangerous.
Emma sat by the fire, feeling the warmth fully penetrate her cold body, and watched the golden flames dance.
Breaths. She thought about the past hours, the terror of being trapped in the storm, the fear of freezing, and the desperate steps she had taken to find safety. Now, wrapped in a thick blanket and in the safety of Luke's cabin, those memories felt distant but vivid, like a story she had lived and survived. Luke moved around the cabin quietly, tending to the fire, straightening blankets, and ensuring that everything was in order. He remained calm and careful, always making sure the cabin stayed warm and comfortable. Emma watched him from her chair, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and admiration. He had been a stranger only hours before, yet now he felt like a guardian, a steady presence in the midst of chaos. She sipped a fresh cup of hot tea Luke had prepared, the warmth spreading from her hands to her chest. The tea had a calming effect, and she found herself relaxing completely for the first time since the storm had begun. She realized that this Christmas Eve, terrifying as it had been, had become something extraordinary. A story of human kindness, trust, and connection. "You should eat something," Luke said, placing a small plate with bread, cheese, and fruit near her. "You've been through a lot, and your body needs fuel after that cold." She felt hungry for the first time since the storm. As she ate slowly, savoring each bite, she reflected on how quickly life could change. One moment she had been driving confidently toward her parents' house, imagining a quiet Christmas evening. The next, she had been shivering in the snow, desperate for warmth and safety. And now, here she was, fed, warm, and safe, thanks to the kindness of someone she had just met.
"Luke," she said softly after a moment, "I don't know how I can ever thank you enough."
I've never experienced anything like this. Last night, it could have been so different.
Luke glanced at her, his expression calm but serious.
"You survived. That's what matters," he said quietly. "The rest, it's just life reminding us that kindness and trust can make a difference."
That's all anyone can do. Emma felt a lump in her throat.
His words were simple, but they carried a deep truth she had never thought about in such a clear way. Life had a way of teaching lessons when she least expected them.
That night had been a lesson in humility, courage, and the power of human compassion.
She realized that surviving the storm was not just about being physically strong. It was also about trusting others, accepting help when needed, and recognizing the goodness that existed even in strangers.
As the evening settled, the cabin felt cozy and peaceful.
The storm outside had turned into a gentle snowfall, and the world beyond the cabin seemed quiet and still. Emma glanced at Luke, who had returned to tending the fire, and realized that she had learned more about him than she had expected. He was more than a rugged man who lived alone in the countryside. He was patient, kind, and deeply aware of the world around him. He had seen hardship and danger before, yet he had chosen to offer help without hesitation, showing courage and compassion in a way that inspired her.
Breaths. She shifted in her chair and asked softly, "Do you often help people who get stuck out here?"
Luke smiled faintly. Not always.
Most people are careful, prepared. But sometimes accidents happen, and when they do,
If I can help, I do. It's simple, really.
breath. You were in need, so I helped. Emma nodded, feeling a warm sense of respect for him. But she realized that his actions went beyond mere duty. They reflected character, integrity, and the ability to act without expecting anything in return. She had seen acts of kindness before, but nothing so quiet, steady, and powerful as what Luke had done for her that night. The night grew darker, but the cabin remained bright with the fire and the small lamps that cast gentle light on the walls. Emma felt a sense of calm she had not felt in a long time. Breaths. She thought about her family, far away, and felt a mix of longing and relief. She would see them soon, but this night had given her something she couldn't have anticipated, a deeper understanding of trust, resilience, and human connection. Luke noticed her thoughtful expression and spoke quietly.
You'll make it to your family safely. The roads will be clearer in the morning, and the storm is slowing down.
You've got this. Emma smiled, grateful for the reassurance. Britt, thank you, she said softly, for everything. I will never forget this night. Bray.
He nodded, returning to his quiet work by the fire.
The room was filled with a peaceful silence, broken only by the crackling flames and the soft patter of snow against the cabin roof. Emma felt the weight of the past hours lift, replaced by a sense of gratitude and calm. Realized that the storm had been a test, showing her both the fragility and the resilience of life. And it had revealed the quiet power of human kindness, the willingness to help without expectation, to trust without hesitation, and to act when it mattered most. As the night continued, Emma finally allowed herself to lie down on the bed again, pulling the thick blankets over her. She felt warm, safe, and cared for, a feeling she had not realized she had been missing. Her mind replayed the events of the storm, the fear, the struggle, the desperate steps through the snow, and she felt a deep appreciation for the outcome. She had survived not just because of her own efforts, but because someone had been willing to extend a hand when she needed it most. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth and safety envelop her completely. For the first time since the storm began, she felt fully at peace. She knew that the experience would stay with her forever, not as a memory of fear, but as a story of courage, trust, and the simple yet profound impact of human kindness.
Luke kept the fire burning through the night, occasionally checking to make sure she was comfortable. Though he had lived alone for many years, he felt a quiet satisfaction in having been able to help someone in need.
He understood the significance of the night for both of them, a moment of connection, understanding, and shared humanity that transcended words. By morning, the storm had ended completely. The snow outside glistened in the early sunlight, covering the landscape in a serene blanket of white.
Emma woke feeling refreshed, truly rested for the first time in days.
She stood near the window, taking in the calm beauty of the countryside, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had faced fear, cold, and uncertainty, but she had emerged safe, warm, and stronger than before. Luke entered the room quietly, offering her a small breakfast and another cup of tea. "The roads are clear enough now," he said. "Chris, you should make your way to your family. They'll be waiting for you."
Emma nodded, a soft smile spreading across her face.
Breaths. "I will," she said. I'll never forget this night, not just because of the storm, but because of your kindness. Luke smiled, a quiet, steady smile. Take care, Emma. Remember what you learned tonight, the importance of trust, resilience, and helping when it matters.
Life has a way of reminding us of those lessons. Emma felt a lump in her throat but nodded.
She packed her things, ensuring she had everything she needed, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, but no longer threatening. The snow sparkled in the morning sunlight, and the world seemed calm, almost magical after the chaos of the previous night. As she walked toward the road, she looked back at the cabin one last time. Luke stood near the door, watching her with a steady gaze. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and connection. This Christmas Eve would be remembered forever, not for the storm or fear, but for the warmth, kindness, and trust that had carried her through the night.
Emma realized that sometimes life's most meaningful moments came from unexpected places and unexpected people.
She had learned to trust, to accept help, and to recognize the quiet strength and kindness that existed in others. And she knew that this night, this experience, would remain with her for the rest of her life, a story she would carry and share, a story of survival, human connection, and the simple yet profound impact of compassion in the face of fear. With renewed energy and hope, she continued down the road toward her family, feeling the warmth in her body and heart. She had survived the storm. Yes, but more importantly, she had discovered the quiet power of human kindness, a gift that would remain with her long after the snow had melted.